All right, here we go. I'm super stoked. I've been thinking about this all week. I'm here with Manuel from Ma Strength. They are killing it on Instagram. Their course is fantastic. The books are so damn good. So, training center in China.
My first time in China was as an undergrad, and that was like I was just studying abroad, and I wanted to go somewhere different. You know, I'd always had an interest in Asia, so I knew I wanted to go there, and ended up getting a full scholarship to study abroad in China. And so I was like, okay, great. And so I went there and studied the language and the culture and stuff like that, and then learned how to speak and read and write. And then, you know, that year that I went there was the year that SARS broke out. So my trip was cut short. But I'd been there for a while and just picking up the language and whatnot. And so, but around that time in the early 2000s, you know, I was also picking up weightlifting. And so, you know, I saw this DVD from Randy Strawson, and he had a lot of videos of European teams and European championships and whatnot, and some of the world championships. But he had this one that he put out about Chinese weightlifting, and I saw the way the team moved in that video, and it was just so unique from any of the other stuff that was in his other DVDs. So, you know, in a lot of those DVDs, you see, you know, superstars like Piros Dimas and Azanidze and you know, Botev and things like that, you know, guys like that. But all of those guys move so differently, you know, and even if you know, guys who are in the same team, you know, like the Greek team, for example, you know, you watch Leonidas, he lifts completely differently from Piros Dimas, you know. I mean, Dimas lifted differently than anybody with that famous head whip that he does, but still, you know, like, I mean, people tried to emulate that, you know,
of course.
There wasn't, you know, there wasn't any YouTube at the time. There wasn't any Facebook. There weren't any tutorials or seminars at the time. So at the time, I mean, basically you just learned by videos and then whatever you could read on the internet.
Yeah. Actual VHS videos.
Yeah. And I even read, you know, I was definitely into strength training at the time too. So I read a lot of like Louis stuff.
Yep.
And, you know, how to get stronger and whatnot. But I was really interested in the technique of weightlifting. And that just kind of spoke to my background a bit, coming as a gymnast. So like, I did enjoy powerlifting, but you know, weightlifting is kind of like gymnastics with weight.
Yeah,
you know, like
absolutely.
Kind of how I saw it. And I had the flexibility for it, you know, to do some of these movements like an overhead squat or a front squat, you know, and things like that. So I felt like I had like a foundation for it, much more so than powerlifting. Like,
sure.
Nothing against powerlifters. I just you know, I went to the Arnold once again early on, and when I saw what professional powerlifters look like, I was like, I'm not built like that. Like, I love the sport. I appreciate the sport, but you know, I love Louis' articles and stuff too, but I'm not going to squat 800 pounds. Like that's
fair.
That's not in the cards.
Yeah, me neither.
You know, when I saw the guys who were squatting 800 pounds, I was like, oh, okay, I need to do something else. So weightlifting looked a lot more realistic, you know. So I got into that, and I always had, you know, so I spoke Chinese. And I was interested in weightlifting, and you know, I saw that DVD, and it just stuck with me for a while. And so eventually I ended up visiting there, and I had a chance to visit the training center in Beijing.
And is that like there, the primary training center, or is it like many training centers, or is this the training center?
So there are many national training centers in China. Okay. Now the training center is in Beijing. Like that's where the entire national team comes together. That's one of the bases that they go to. They have several where the whole team will go and train because you know, it's hot in Beijing during the summer, so they tend to go south to a base in Wuzhishan, or they have another one in it's another mountain type of base. But they'll switch locations just based on the seasons, and also just kind of to get away from the city,
Yep.
and kind of just focus on weightlifting. Most of those kinds of bases are like on a mountain, and they're really secluded.
Like what you'd imagine. That's exactly what I would imagine.
Pretty much. But there are a lot of provincial bases that host national level lifters. So when these athletes are not in Beijing and they're just training at home, they'll train at those bases.
Right. And then in Beijing, what are you looking at for numbers then, for like how many athletes are there? And is this weightlifting only, or is this like a sports facility?
So that training base in Beijing has a lot of sports. So it's a national training base for, badminton, tennis,
right.
swimming, basketball, and they have weightlifting there as well. And that base has 50 platforms for women and 50 for men. So just like 50 men on 50 platforms for men on one side, 50 for women on the other side. It's huge.
That's it.
And and then in the center is a huge stage where they have competitions.
Right.
Well, they'll do mock competitions, and then in the middle, in front of the stage, that's usually where they put a bunch of tables for massage, or
right.
They'll put a ping pong table there or something like that. That's their open space.
Sure.
But yeah, but everything there is like it's top of the line. It's brand new. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful base.
Yeah. And then how many athletes or is that looking at then for weightlifting there that would operate out of that facility?
It depends. It kind of depends on the current talent and the demand and where the program is going. So in the times that I've seen it, it's never been full. So I've never seen like every platform taken. I've seen a lot of them taken, but not all of them. And it kind of depends on the coaches and the athletes. So sometimes, the focus there a lot of times is it's usually one coach per athlete. So, if you want to talk about individualized programming and whatnot, doesn't get any more than that. Yeah. But if you have a coach that has, 2 or 3 athletes from the same province and they all train together, they're probably going to stay with that one coach. They might have an assistant coach or whatnot. So in that case, you don't, you can't divide up 3 platforms, maybe 2, but just for the coach, because the coach is just there like a hawk. Yeah. There's no walking around or, scouting the floor. They're just right there watching every single lift. So,
I think that's a piece.
They have the capacity for that.
Yeah.
But, it's better to have a little bit extra just in case.
I think it's interesting. I always feel like a lot of times when you're speaking about weightlifting that a lot of Westerners really feel like the Chinese system is this idea that there's like one person leading a room of 100 athletes all like snapping to command, and that it's, if an athlete is injured or, isn't performing, they're gone and just replaced by another athlete. Like, is that like, what is it like there when you're watching in that environment? Like if you're saying that it's 1-to-1, like coach athlete, the impression I get is that that's taking each individual athlete very seriously.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So it's not, it is hierarchical. So there is like, a head men's coach, and he has an assistant as well. And, and then, you might have a coach with an athlete, and they might be an assistant coach as well. So you might have 2 athletes or 2 coaches for an athlete. So, right. And then you have all of the recovery people, so you might have some PTs, maybe they work with one athlete or a couple of athletes. You have the massage people and stuff. So you have a team behind those athletes. And, at that stage, like you don't want to, it can't be a factory, because you've put so much time into some of these in these athletes. A lot of them have been lifting, for maybe a decade, so there's already been a lot of investment in those athletes that you don't just want to discard them.
Yeah. My understanding is it's been taken very seriously for each person, that like any injury, anything that comes up needs to be like accounted for and answered to for, what that athlete was up to, and getting them back on track. Like, My impression
For
is
sure.
that the athletes in China are treated like professionals and taken very seriously for each step of the way.
Yeah, I mean, especially at that high level. And, now it is still competitive. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because, you have, you might be in a weight class, but, and you have all these resources, but then there's another guy in the same weight class, maybe from a different province or maybe even from the same province, who will take your spot if you get injured.
Yeah.
So
And what does China put forward to the Olympics? Like how many people would represent China?
I mean, they put a full team in.
Yeah.
They're capable of qualifying a full team.
Yeah. And then how
And
many people could be potentially on that? Like I feel like that the depth is very, like they're picking from a ton of people who all could potentially be gold medalists.
yeah, well, you can look at women's weightlifting for an example. So when women's weightlifting came on the scene, the Chinese women crushed almost every weight class.
Yeah.
Like they got the majority of the medals, of the gold medals. They got the majority of the medals, and then they got the majority of the world records. And it was like that for the first couple of years, and then eventually there were some rules in the IWF that started implementing quotas, to kind of open up the opportunities for others.
Yeah.
So I would say look at women's weightlifting for that example.
Yeah.
And then on the men's side, the Chinese weightlifting. Sometimes people will criticize it, saying that it's only good for light athletes, small athletes, people that are built that have an Asian frame or whatever. But I mean, there's a big difference between a 56 kilo guy and an 85 kilo guy.
Yeah.
And China has had the capability of not dominating, but at least like representing in those weight classes.
Yep.
And so, and I think one reason they don't have a lot of representation in the heavier classes is just because they don't really invest in it.
Right.
It is competitive, it is harder, but when you have so many other people in the lighter weight classes, you have more to choose from.
Yeah.
It's just an easier numbers game on that end. I think if they had the money and the support for those heavier weight classes, you would see different results.
Same results they're getting in the lighter classes. When did China become such a world dominator for weightlifting?
They really started to project in the 80s. That's when things started to really shoot up for them. But before that time, it was a struggle.
Yeah.
So, if you want to go back to 1900 or so, I mean, China over the past 100 years, at least 120 years now, it was completely different. I mean, 120 years ago, they had an empire, they had an emperor. It was imperial China.
Yeah.
And then they went from that to a brief Republican government to then the modern day PRC. So there was a lot of turmoil during that time, and so a lot of this notion of fitness, of physical strength, physical fitness was kind of brought out from that political struggle, because you had a lot of reformers in the early 1900s who were China was now it was opening up to the world, and they saw how they were at a disadvantage compared to Western countries that had more technology, more weaponry, and so the criticism at that time by the reformers was that China was weak, that you need to be strong, you need to strengthen your body as well. Strengthening your body was commensurate with strengthening the nation.
Right.
And
man, how nice would that be spread across the world, actually?
Yeah, and at the time, there was also a push, even by Mao Zedong at the time, to push for the strength of women. Now it was very gendered in the sense of they want strong women to produce strong babies. And so, but also to work, and chip into the struggle.
Yeah.
So there was this outward look at the time to figure out how to not only strengthen yourself, but strengthen the country. And so at the time, in that early period, the YMCA was in China, and they were spreading Christianity. And at that time, Christianity was also kind of linked with fitness. It was more like, your body is your temple.
Yeah.
So you have, and if your temple is God's creation, then, you owe it to yourself and to God to take care of it.
Right.
So one way they were able to introduce Christian doctrine to the Chinese, who at the time were also trying to figure out how can we strengthen ourselves in the nation. They said, hey, fitness, so that's where they started introducing, strength sports and just sports in general, basketball, badminton, weightlifting, etc. I mean, the modern barbell wasn't built until, was starting to be introduced around that time as well. So it's not like,
what are we about? What timeline is this?
This was like in the early 1900s. I would say around 1920.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Or maybe a little bit before that. But so, at that time, weightlifting was in the Olympics, but it was, they had a lot of events. You had the single arm lifts, the double arm lifts, the dumbbell lifts and stuff. Then the barbell came out. So there was just a whole lot of change going on.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of information. And so, a lot of reformers at the time they were looking to everybody, but especially, Western / American / Christian sources of fitness. And then, and so that held on for a little while until, but because of the political struggles, eventually people got resentful of the Westerners, and they started looking to other sources. As the communists grew in power, they started looking more towards the Soviet Union, and the Soviets at the time were, and this is like, now in the 1940s, 1950s, the Soviets were doing their own research and trying, rising as a superpower. Yeah. So as once the communists were successful, then there was a link. It's kind of like a big brother, little brother kind of relationship between the Soviet Union and Russia. And so then during that time, there was a lot of exchange. So a lot of Chinese delegations for all sports, but especially weightlifting, they started going to the bases there, and then they learned how to organize themselves. So they saw the way the Soviets had, how they planned out the gyms, what kind of equipment they had, what kind of periodization they followed, how they classified assistance movements, all, just everything. And then they tried to copy that there, and they saw some results, but they didn't get the same results as the Soviets. And so part of that was the Soviets didn't tell them everything. They didn't understand some of the pharmacology back then.
Yeah, right. That probably, yeah.
Yeah, they kept it real. They were like, hey, we didn't know what they were using.
Yeah.
So, but the other part was is that they just thought that if they could just carbon copy, everything, that you would find a way, that you would get the same result.
Yeah.
And they didn't. And so that's when they started looking more internally and trying to kind of blend what they've learned from the West and then what they learned from the Soviet Union, and then put their own spin on it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece. Like, it does come up in all kinds of literature from like even Bob Decano, and I think that's a really, certainly our gym for sure has felt it as being down the path from Westside on the conjugate system. Certainly, I feel what I've seen in practice and read about is there is a component of national differences, local differences, environmental differences. Like, I think a lot of these elements, cultural differences, many of these things actually lead into adjustments in programming that are actually very important to be able to identify and then make. Otherwise, I think just a straight copy of another program from somewhere else, I think that just the results can really vary. So trying to trick the system then would you describe it as a conjugate system for like Chinese weightlifting? Would you say that, or like what would you describe the system as?
That they learned from the Soviets.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't come across that word in any of my translations. I just think that they just said it was the weightlifting program.
It was their program. Yeah. And then China started being successful at adapting that then into this. It would have had to been in the 70s if they're going to be, they would need a big run up leading into being successful.
No. So like, so in the 50s, they started implementing it, and they started seeing some success with it. And then what happened is that, again, the politics of the sport changed in the sense of there started to become a rift between the Soviet Union and China. Right. And so then China started looking inward a little bit more because, they no longer had that resource, and there was just a general suspicion of with the Soviets at the time. So then they started, putting their resources into the people that have already gone there, but then also there was a demand to make this work, figure it out, and so some of the founders, they put their heads together and started making this happen. So one of the founders, his name is Zhao Qingkui. He had a sense of the lifts, but he didn't have a high education or anything like that, so he didn't have a scientific background to really kind of convey what he meant by what he thought about. But he had his philosophy behind the lifts, and so that philosophy became the foundation for Chinese weightlifting. And so at the time, he would say that the philosophy for the lifts are close, fast, and low. Yeah, that's how he if you could fulfill those requirements, then you could have a perfect lift. And that was what he used as a lifter and early on as a coach. And then one of his teammates had a biomechanics degree, and so he was actually college educated, and so he was able to apply physics and a 2D model to what this philosophy was. And so that's when he came up with the 3 gravity principles. And basically, if you look at like a stick figure from the side, it just means that in order to produce force along and stay close to your center of gravity, you have the horizontal forces based on this 2D model have to be equal magnitude, simultaneous, and in their respective directions, what they call opposite directions. And so if you can fulfill those requirements, then you can be close to the bar and also have the bar close to you. If you're close, then you can produce more force onto the bar. That means that you can move the bar fast, right? And if the bar moves fast, it's going to create enough height for you to get low. And that's the way that they looked at it early on. And then eventually, through experience and more research, they added 2 more words. They added the 4th word is sometimes you'll see it as timing, you'll see it as rhythm, you'll see it as accuracy. But the point is, it's to avoid a press out, but you have to try to catch the bar as close to the apex as possible. And then the 5th word is stable. So, you have a big platform, especially in major competitions, but all you need is your base of support. You don't need to run around the platform chasing a snatch or chasing a jerk or anything like that. If you fulfill, these requirements, you'll stay stable within your base of support. And so then, so it was 5 words within the philosophy.
And that's still what you're teaching today in the course, as well as what we see in the book itself.
Right. Yeah. Because I saw those principles in the books and in many articles, and so it's what I've been able to translate and put out into the world. Yeah. And so so we're going back to the history lesson. So they were putting that out there, and then during the 60s and 70s, it was a little bit rough for China because they had the Great Leap Forward, and then they had the Cultural Revolution, and so that was a lot of economic hardship for people. So it was really hard. During the Cultural Revolution, there were almost no events. Like China just was closed completely to the world. During the Great Leap Forward, which was before that, they were pushing hard to try to, make it on the world stage.
Yeah.
And it was a lot more militaristic in terms of just the rhetoric and also the approach. So in that time, you would have athletes live with the military, and they would live on bases, and they would, follow a very strict lifestyle, such that they learned the sport, but then they were also required to live a military lifestyle and also get, political indoctrination and whatnot. So, that, keep it real, that forms the foundation of what it is now, because, these athletes, they live on these bases. Now they don't live with the military anymore, but they still have a very structured life.
Yeah.
As a professional.
So inside of that, the training center in Beijing, athletes are living at that facility.
Yeah. So in Beijing, they have a little bit more freedom just because most of them are adults at that point.
Yep.
But they do have, private housing, private apartments and whatnot, and they get shuttled in to the base. But if you go to, say, like a provincial level school, that's where the athletes, they literally live on the base. Like, you walk outside your dorm, and then the next building over is the gym, and the next building over that is the cafeteria, and that's it. That's the life.
And is school managed then at those facilities as well? So are they being separated from like a public school system into like a sports facility with their education continuing at that facility?
Yeah. So I guess, when the kids start, they tend to do sports in school. So it's kind of like, physical, just regular physical education, or like PE. Yeah. Whenever, like what we kind of know is phys ed. Yep. And then what happens is you have scouts that, they go through the schools and they try to find kids early on for all kinds of sports, gymnastics, swimming, track and field, weightlifting, things like that. And so what they'll do is, if they find kids that are interested in this and that have potential for this, then they'll see if they can go to a sports school. Yeah. And at that time, they're still beginners, and so they still live with their parents. And the coaches there have to talk to the parents and say, hey, I think your kid would be good for weightlifting. I think there's a lot of potential here. And so the kids will train, and then they go to school, and then they'll keep that going until they get to higher levels. Now, based on where you live in China, you might have more levels than other, but the point, you might go from, just say, like a little, your little local school to, say, a city school. Yep. And maybe even a county school. And in those levels, you're starting to get a little bit of support, just a little bit of I don't want to say salary, because you're not yet professional. You're still going to school, but you're getting a little bit of a bonus. Yeah, right. And it's only when you start going to more of a provincial level where things get real. And so there, there is tutoring available for some school, for some provinces, and some of them do keep up with their education there. Yeah. But and because there's also the law in China that you do have to have a minimal level of education. Mm-hmm. But the training becomes very real, and you might stay there for forever until you get selected to get to the national team. But so that's where you'll see a bunch of people where the famous non-famous weightlifter that's lifting above the world record. Yeah, right. So there's only so many spaces, only so many coaches that can go to the national base. So you'll see a lot of talent at those provincial schools. Crazy. Yeah, it's awesome. So I like the provincial schools the best, just because like that's what most people that is what most people think Chinese weightlifting is. Right. That is the struggle. That is it's super competitive. That's where you have a ton of athletes. Yeah. And it's the strongest survive. By the time you get to the national base, you're kind of like a thoroughbred. Yep. they're not going to run you into the ground. They're just trying to keep you healthy so that you can perform at the world stage or the Olympics.
Yeah, I guess the pieces would be a lot of the development must be wrapped as you transition from provincial to national level. Like a lot, like the foundation and a lot of that work must be done, and now it's just that very fine tuning that's separating those levels of athletes. Is that right?
Yeah, and then it's also maintenance. Because you're trying to maintain. You're still trying to create adaptation at that high level.
Yeah,
but it's a fine line between inducing a change for adaptation and then getting injured.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Cause you need enough volume in your training, day, like meso macro, cycles to just be able to maintain lifts at a certain percentage, or maintain those maximal lifts, inside of like, the season.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, it's like, when you're less developed, you can still get a good response from 70%, maybe 80%.
Yeah.
85 and anything above that, will induce a response. And, but when you're at that elite level, for you to even maybe even feel a workout, you have to hit 90%, 95%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
and you only have so many of those lifts in you in a day.
Yeah.
And with that load as well, because it's high, if that movement isn't great, the potential for injury is also higher.
Yeah.
So if you're always moving at 95% and you just happen to be a little tired that day, that could be the difference between an injury and just a bad lift, a missed lift.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's the thing, is you just have to walk that tightrope, and because that window of adaptation is just so much smaller compared to a less developed lifter.
And what's hours in a week? So like provincial level versus national level, what is the training volume by hours in a week?
So, by the time if you've been at those provincial bases for a while, then you're pretty much training the same as a national level lifter.
Right.
So usually you'll see about 9 sessions a week. So you'll have a couple days that are double days, and then 2 single days, and then Sundays are usually off for everybody.
Right. And then inside of those sessions, then are you going to be are you talking about 2-hour session in the morning, gap, 2-hour session in the afternoon? Or is it going to be like a 3-hour session in the morning, gap, hour session in the afternoon? What's the duration of a single session?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good average. Some of it depends on who you're training. So the women will usually train longer.
Right.
And also, you kind of, you have to go with the flow. So, for example, say you're doing a double that day, and, so your morning stuff will be, say just some squat work and some strength stuff. And then the later day, you're going to do something a little bit more technical, like clean and jerk. Right. But if if you're feeling it and it's looking good, you might do a PR that morning, without the intention.
Right.
So if that's the case, you hit a PR in your squat. Well, then as the coach, you might say, okay, well, we're supposed to hit, say 90% of the clean this afternoon for a double, but maybe we'll just do a single based on that squat this morning.
Yeah. Right. So
maybe we'll cut the session a bit.
Yeah. And there's just wiggle room for flow inside of the individual athletes programming. Yeah. That's top tier for sure.
Yeah. So they have a plan, but they are, they definitely, and they have their requirements, but then they're very free to deviate from that based on the situation.
Yeah. And are those guys maxing out I guess the primary lift, so snatch, clean and jerk and snatch, but also I guess the, tertiary lifts of back squat, front squat, push press. Are they hitting maxes on those regularly, semi-regularly? How often would that come up for that kind of athlete?
Yeah. I mean, so, basically they touch it when when it's hot, they go for it.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Because I mean, if you're feeling it, if you're feeling good, if you're feeling recovered, and you feel like you can PR that day, why wait to, and it's a Tuesday,
Yeah.
Why wait till Friday? Like, who
Yeah.
cares? There's nothing special about Friday other than it's how we schedule, how we schedule the week.
Yeah.
But, especially with these athletes, when you go to a weightlifting competition, some of them might lift on a Tuesday. Some of them might lift on a Wednesday morning. It depends on what weight class they're in, what the organization is for the competition. So not everybody has, will compete, or it should be adapted to only maxing out on a Friday night.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. The big separator between powerlifting and weightlifting is, weightlifting seems to have a lot more variety in the days of competition and time of day than powerlifting does. And I suspect, some of that's maybe the attachment to being an Olympic sport, that there's more changes to that. Maybe that's
So like, so I'll see, women in lighter weight classes, they go really heavy in the mornings. Not all of them, but you're more likely to see that because that's when they lift.
Yeah.
Like if they go to competition, they might be in that morning session or an early afternoon session.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Whereas,
and they might go heavy in the morning on a squat and then look towards heavy and Olympic in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. It feels like a lot of stuff is like leans towards like hit the more technical components first, where you might snatch, clean and jerk as the first session of the day, and then go heavier, simpler patterns, back squat, press in the afternoon.
It depends. So I would say, like, if you are if you're less developed, that would be the case.
Right.
But when you're at a higher level, you do need dedicated strength sessions. So because you can't always put the squat at the end of snatch and clean and jerk, because then you're never going to get that squat up. And if you don't get the squat up, then you don't have that strength reserve for the clean and jerk or for the snatch.
I fucking love hearing that.
So what they'll do is that, so if you have, say, if you're at that level and you're hitting the squats heavy, instead of doing something more technical like a snatch from the floor, you might do a snatch from the blocks, or not even a snatch. You might do like a heavy power snatch, something that doesn't tax the legs as much, but that you can still rip on it pretty heavy. But even though you hit 100% on it, it's not going to be as much of a stress on the body.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like whatever your max push press is, you can do that all day long, but it's never going to be as more than your jerk.
Yeah, totally. And I guess,
or if you do heavy clean pulls, those are heavier than your cleans, but they're also less technical because you're not worried about catching it.
And I think that's the interesting thing is for Chinese weightlifting, like you're talking about patterns where, these athletes are not just maxing out, and you see it on your Instagram channel, of these athletes are not just maxing out clean, jerk, snatch, clean and jerk. Like they are doing every variation. There's all kinds of variety in those primary patterns before you even start looking at talking about the accessory and feeder movements to those patterns. And will they max out? Like, is everything kind of fair game for as far as building to a max on those barbell patterns?
I mean, you'll definitely see it in the strength lifts, so you see heavy squats, heavy deadlifts. You might see some heavy clean pulls. You'll see more pure strength movements and then the pure technical movements. You'll see some heavy, a lot of maxing out there. And then there's a little bit less in between. So for example, like a clean pull, you can do a max clean pull, but what's the line between that and a deadlift? Like eventually that clean pull is going to become a deadlift.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the area is a little bit more gray there. It's more just like how, so there, a coach might say, okay, we want to see some speed, or I need to see the bar rise during the extension just by this amount. And once it starts to deviate from that, okay, we're done. That'll be your max clean pull. So you'll see that, but other movements are a little bit easier, like a push press or whatnot. But even with push press, I mean, you know, you could totally do a really ugly push press, and max out on it. But you do want to max out based on the quality.
Yeah.
So, so sometimes the coach will, they'll see that the athlete could physically do more, but if it looks gross, then they're going to say, no, it's done.
Sure. Like for lots of, reasons. Yeah. Just even the exposure to injury and everything must increase with the breakdown and quality of pattern. But at the
end of the day, you definitely want to max out the snatch and the clean because that's the goal.
And then, but that would include then like, hangs from different heights from blocks. Like, would those be fair game for maxing out for those athletes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then primary into like secondary, then accessory. Is that how the session is going to kind of go?
Yeah. So you want your, if you're doing, if strength is not the focus in that session, you definitely want to do your technical movements first, and do them fresh, and then do some sort of semi-technical movement after. So, you want to start with snatch first and then do snatch pull, or move on to something, move on to jerk. You can do snatch and jerk in the same session. Both are equally technical, but the snatch doesn't take away from the jerk as much. But and especially if you're doing the jerk from, say, some blocks or the rack or something like that.
And
so
then
that's a little bit. And
then from there, would most sessions finish with accessory and midline? So like getting into, I think like it's more common, and I think it was more referred to as like bodybuilding style movements, but I would say accessory. But you're getting into now, like I've seen video of the Chinese guys doing dips with the plates behind their back. Like, is that going to be pretty, not that necessarily that exact movement, but is that going to be pretty standard fare that whether it's strength primary piece or a technical primary piece, that once you move through that, then now you're getting into like bodybuilding or accessory patterns? Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
And are they going to kind of select 3 to 5 of those on a session? Or again, I guess it must vary a lot from athlete to athlete.
I mean, again, it kind of, it depends on what happens. So like if you hit a snatch PR that day,
I
at that point, it's like, all right, we're done. Like, let's go get some so you might do like
that sounds great.
Yeah, you might do a couple of pulls, but you're done. I mean, because then what the coach wants at that time is like, okay, you got a new PR on something that matters.
Yeah,
and now let's let the adaptation and the recovery happen.
Right.
There's no point in just grinding you further because it's a PR by definition. You've already reached that new level of stress.
Yeah.
Let's recover from that and super compensate from that.
Yep.
So, but if you're just having like an average day and you're following the program, and you hit, say, 85% for 3 triples and, there's nothing real special about it. It's just kind of, an average day, then, you'll do some, 2 or 3 bodybuilding movements at the end and probably do for, 3 or 4 sets of each and then go from there and then get ready for the next session. But yeah, I mean, if the iron is hot and you strike and you make it, it's, we're done.
You won the day.
Yeah.
And then would inside of those like bodybuilding movements, is that going to include like core, midline, whatever you want to call sort of like your base of support training?
I mean, they'll do everything. I mean, they're not above leg curls, leg extension, calf raises. So even leg stuff. Yeah, forearms, arms.
I remember attending the seminar with you a couple years back, and inside that list was like handstand push-ups. Like kind of, it was like almost anything was fair game, right?
Yeah, and they'll do carries as well. They'll do grip work. So like they'll take like a shot, and then they'll do like they'll drop the shot and then try to catch it with each hand, they'll take some plates or a kettlebell or whatever, and they'll just do some suitcase carries. So they'll anything's fair game. That's where you can get creative as a coach, to try to manage their internal pressure and build some hypertrophy, especially for the younger athletes, because they got to get they need more hypertrophy to kind of withstand the loads, the upcoming loads. Whereas for the higher level guys, they at that point they kind of know what they like to do, what they don't like to do, and then what they need to do to either feel healthy or stay healthy, stay injury free. So by that point, there's the exercise selection is a lot less.
Yeah, but that's amazing to like, because that is, I feel, not the sentiment out there, is that the new weightlifting athlete should be spending time on hypertrophy, building quality muscle and strength inside of that initial early phases. That I feel like a lot of the times the talk is like, it's all technical, the position and technique is all that matters. And my feeling on that has always been that what happens then is you get too far down the rabbit hole and you're missing a really big part that does take, like, strength takes its own time to develop, in my opinion. And if it's not started early enough, that if you get really technically proficient to the lifts, to this idea that you're just going to make up, now get strong, it feels like too late. Like you're missing the balance of those components.
Well, these kids, these are kids, so they're also going through puberty, so their body is changing. Yeah. And so you always have to keep, stay on top of the strength work, because you're going to have different leverage and, body structure throughout your career.
For sure. So, you're changing height and lever lengths. That's a crazy thing as a coach to be compensating for inside of movements that are so fast and technical. What's the age? So at provincial level, then what's like the young end of that? Is it kind of 13 for those provincial camps? Yeah.
13 is young, but I've seen it happen. So most of the kids, the earliest that I've seen is like they start at 8. Most will start around 10. But 8 is not unheard of. And so, if you start that early, then, you can get to a provincial level by 13. Most of them will be in, 14 or 15. Yeah. And then the kids who are the teens, who are 17, 18, 19, they're already at high levels. And they're not, they might be able to hit the numbers that some of the national athletes can, but they just can't do it consistently.
Right.
So, I remember one girl in Hunan, her name is Luo Shifang, and she did a 105 snatch, 105 kilos from the hip. So like not even like hang or anything. She just like took it off the block. She walked back. She just kind of bent over and dropped into a snatch. And that was like that is above the world record, or the junior world record at that time. Right. And so she's a 59 kilo girl. And so
59 kilo snatching from the hips, 105.
105.
Yeah.
and her max snatch from the floor at the time was 103. So,
oh man,
and so I asked her, I said, next time I see you, I mean, it'll probably be on TV, or in Beijing. And she looked at me puzzled. She was like, really? Why? And I was like, because, next year you might get selected to be in the national team. And she was like, oh, no. She's like, I can't hang with those girls. Those girls are really strong, And I'm like, man. Now fast forward though, she's actually on the national team now. She won China nationals. And so, I was right. But, that's just her mindset, she was like, because those girls are doing those weights as well, but they are able to do them more frequently or with more consistency than she can.
That's something. I love that. That's really interesting just to think about that idea. It's not that they can't move it. It's that they can't move it consistently.
There's a mental aspect to being a more seasoned athlete. So one example of that was at the World Championships with Lu Xiaojun and Li Dayin, and they were going, they were going head to head, for the total, and Li Dayin set a world record, but it only lasted 60 seconds, because Lu came out and broke it again. Yeah,
this just happened though. This when was this? This is crazy.
And so and at the time, Lu, so Lu did a like a very light first attempt because he had his back was acting up, and he waited until the end, and was just kind of trying to rehab his back, you know, in that moment. I ended up taking a ridiculous jump, you know, like let's say, like, I think it was like 14, 15, 16 kilo jump for a second attempt.
That's insane.
To come out and break the world record.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's experience. You know,
yeah.
Like,
confidence and experience.
Yeah, that's not just like, you know, because Lee Dayin was just a kilo behind, you know, so it's not about strength at that point. It's about, you know, what you got up here.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so for somebody like the girl that I was talking about, you know, she didn't, you know, she had the physical talent, but she didn't have the competition talent yet.
Yeah.
You know, she still had to build that.
How many times, and I guess that's the next thing I think about is just like, how often will Chinese weightlifters compete in like a year?
So it's a little bit difficult now because the IWF has been changing the rules as to like how often you can compete and you know, when you have to show up and stuff like that. So I would say, so before and they've recently changed the weight classes since Tokyo Games.
Yeah, totally.
So I would say, so to me, like, I would say before Tokyo, so before even qualifying for Tokyo, I'd say like from Rio and before, the standard was that you had 2 major competitions per year. You had China Nationals in the spring, and then there is a China Nationals in the fall as well. But the people who won the spring would be selected to go do something international in the fall. And so that could be either Asian Championships, World Championships, or Olympic Games, you know, whatever was happening at the end of the year.
Right.
And so at that elite level, it was those 2 major competitions. And then now they would have, you know, mock meets, test events in throughout the year to kind of see where they're at. But that was basically the standard. Now, sometimes you might see some exceptions. You might see 3 competitions in case if they needed to qualify for something. So I'll give you an example. You know, there was one time I was at China Nationals, and Liao Hui was competing against Shi Zhiyong, and so Liao Hui beat Shi Zhiyong and by like a kilo. And so then Shi Zhiyong was also entered to go, I think it was the Asian Championships, which was like, I want to say like a week and a half after that meet. And so basically what he did and he did that as a qualifier to be considered for competitions later in the year. So the only difference between those 2 meets was that he just went up a weight class, and then you know, he powered everything. So he still went heavy, but he didn't go as heavy as he did China Nationals. So for him, he had 3 meets that year.
Yeah.
So
but that's that's more of the exception to the sort of norm.
Yeah, it's more if you needed to qualify to be considered for something in the eyes of the sports bureau.
Yeah. And then moving from there,
lower level athletes, the lower level athletes, they have more opportunities because, you know, they have junior events, they have school age events, sometimes university events.
Sure.
They, as well as their local competitions, provincial competitions and stuff like that. And a lot of those are kind of, the reason they have more of those is because they want to see, like, you know, there's more, since you're at that provincial level, you're spending more time there. There's more time to assess your ability, you know?
Yeah.
So they want to see, are you improving from each competition to the next, you know?
Yeah.
Or are you stagnating, or are you declining? You know, so the more competitions you have, the more opportunities the coach has to either adjust course or to continue what they're doing, you know?
Yeah.
But it also gives an incentive to the athlete as well, you know, to improve, because with all these competitions as well, they do get money for them. So they do get a bonus if they medal or if they set a record. So for them, there's that financial incentive to work hard and try to win. So they want to keep that going so that, you know, they stay competitive and that they can eventually reach that national level.
Yeah.
But by the time you're at that elite level, I mean, you're so taken care of. Just don't get hurt is basically the name of the game.
Yeah.
And
what age then does that sort of like? So then provincial, what for a provincial level, they're kind of what time? Like, what's the upper age limit at that stage?
I mean, you might see some people in their lower 20s,
right? And then the national level,
same. You'll see some people who are, late teens, early 20s. Then you got people like Lu Xiaojun who are in their 30s and crushing everybody still. But he's
that's crazy. Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. The lifeline isn't very long for female lifters, and most of that has to do with just cultural norms. So because once you win, you do get you do get taken care of. You do get a salary, you get a pension. Sometimes you get a house.
Yeah, right.
And so, there is still a lot of social pressure, especially for women. It's like once they're done, they want to start families, and they want to fulfill those expectations from them because, those expectations are still there. Those gender norms are still there. And
right.
So,
and is the compensation for that career like good enough to survive off of? Like,
it can be. Yeah, it can be. Kind of depends on your star power and how and also where you come from. So some provinces have more money than others, and so they have more resources to dedicate to those athletes. If you come from a poor province who just doesn't have the resources to do that, you might have to stay in the game longer, or if you retire, you do something else.
Yeah. So when you were in Beijing then for that first time at the National Center, what was that early 2000s?
I know it was mid 2000s. It was like say 2013, I think.
Okay. And was it right away where you're just like, as you could start to see, well, that piqued your curiosity, and then
my curiosity was back in the Randy Strawson days.
Sure. Yeah.
So
but
it was just
what sort of motivated the book?
The book was after I found out that they had books, so
right.
Once I was able to talk to some researchers and whatnot, so here I am asking them questions, trying to figure out like what their take is on the stuff that we're arguing about here on, fitness forums and whatnot about weightlifting.
Yeah.
And so then, I would get an answer. Sometimes they say, "Oh, we don't worry about this, or we don't think about that. We focus on this instead." Or we think, we do X. And I was like, "Well, why do you do X?" And he's like, "Well, because we did a study on it and we found out that X works." And I was like, "Really? How did you do that study or whatever?" And they say, "Oh, well, we published it, 10 years ago." And I was like, "Really?" And so they would, they say, "We have the paper, you can find it, it's in the library." And I'm like, "Okay." So, they would, so once I found out that literature existed, I at first I just started reading it for myself. I just wanted to understand what was going on. And so, I would read books, I would read articles. Sometimes the books would cite articles. And then that would pique my curiosity even more. And that's just the mind of a researcher. Sometimes an offhand comment by a coach or a researcher might just take you down a rabbit hole. And then you start studying a bunch of other stuff that you weren't intending to start with. So once I started reading enough of it and started to get a sense of the terrain, I was like, wow, like this has to be known,
Yeah.
And so, and at first, I was thinking, maybe I should just like take one of these books and just straight up translate it and then just
sure. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But that didn't work. And so, one reason is that, we have the Russian manuals that were translated, and, they were informative, but also really confusing, I think, for a lot of, they were translated word very literally, but when you do translation, there's always a struggle between translating directly and then translating the meaning.
And are these manuals, are we talking about like the same ones we see translated in English, like the typewriter, like spiral bound, managing the okay, totally, I've read those.
No, I've got the whole stack. So,
yeah, totally. There's some weird, there's some crazy stuff in there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then there's just so as a when you do translation, there's always that struggle between staying literal and then translating the meaning. Yeah. And sometimes there are some words and concepts that that you can summarize in one word in one language, whereas you need like a paragraph to kind of set it up in another language.
Yeah, sure.
And with Chinese and English, that is definitely the case.
Right.
So I tried that. So I tried the literal route first, and I was like, this isn't working. Nobody would understand. It would just, it's not, there's not enough, there's too much meat and not enough fat,
Yeah.
You need a little bit there, the meat is too lean. So I had to, kind of establish a background and a foundation. And so I started going more for the meaning behind the translation rather than just a literal translation.
Right. And, which then has to mean not just reading the books and articles and studies. That's also got to then be talking with the Chinese coaches and be like, hey,
for sure.
Like, am I interpreting this correctly?
To
make sure that's, man, because I'll tell you, like, man, I've read a ton of manuals, a ton of books, lots of university texts. Like, you've done a really good job on both the book, Chinese Weightlifting, and then also the visual manual as well. It's just, it's so clear, especially for having been translated, it's a job well done.
Well, my goal was to, convey what was being published out of China. Because, there were, especially early on with Chinese weightlifting, there were a lot of rumors, and just, and since there were so few videos at the time too, you take one video of one athlete in one phase of training and then try to generalize that for the whole system and every athlete and whatnot. And it's like, that's just not the case, I've seen athletes use chains with their squats. And that's great, but that doesn't mean every athlete does that.
Yes.
I've seen athletes do bands. They use hanging weights on push press, squats, banded squats.
Yeah.
But, so you can find,
but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a standard.
But that doesn't mean that it's like, it's systematically imposed on every lifter.
Yes, totally.
I think what's more important is to understand, why are they making those decisions? What are the principles behind making those decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you understand the principle, then you can be creative in how you implement it.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's awesome. I that's just, for the style of system that we use, for sure, like being able to apply the right piece for that athlete is the whole game. And that's where I think sometimes with the conjugate system, Westside Barbell stuff, you hear a lot of like, oh, I tried it for a couple of weeks and it didn't work. I was like, man, your knowledge must be deep to be able to apply a system like this. Like it's not calculating a percentage of your 1 rep max and then adding 5 pounds a week. Like, you need to be able to watch the athlete perform the lifts, break the errors down, and then apply not only technical corrections, but physical corrections, like just, are they weak in the hamstrings? Is it weak in the glutes? At what point? I love it. Like, that's, for me, I find that like that is how you're like, man, this is how you end up doing this for the rest of your life, is because it's the road of knowledge will be indefinite. You're always going to be looking at something you haven't seen before, or something different, something new, a better, more efficient way to fix a problem. Like, that was my initial attraction to reading this material. And that Chinese system is just, it feels so thoughtful about how to approach an athlete and a movement as a coach.
Yeah. And what's been what was helpful was their technical model. So, when I started learning weightlifting, I, pre YouTube days, pre Facebook page, pre social media, you're at the mercy of your coach, and so, and at the time, I tried working with different people, and I was getting very different instruction, and so,
Of course.
and not just like different cues, but just different fundamentals. And so, in China, they have a technical model that they follow. And even as athletes go through their careers, they switch coaches because, some coaches are national level coaches, some are provincial levels, some work more at the city level, but they're all on the same page as to like what this lift should be.
Right.
So you're not going to get a coach that is going to say, okay, one day you need to, be balanced, pressure over the ball of the foot. And then the next day you get another coach that says, oh, you need to be, start with your balance on the heels. No, they're all there and they're all reinforcing what's happening there. Now they might tell you to go back a little bit or go forward a little bit based on how you manage pressure. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to adjust so that you stay in this spot. They're not trying to take you from one spot and then throw you to the opposite side, So whereas here in the US, I mean, it's very real. If you switch coaches, sometimes you're switching techniques completely, and so you could be working with somebody for
absolutely
years. And then, for whatever reason, school or you move or whatever, and you start working with a new coach and they don't agree with what you were training beforehand. And then they're saying, back to the PBC and time to learn technique, and then.
Yeah. And that's just lost time. It's crazy. It's a huge detriment to the athlete and a disservice. And then also I think it detracts from like the trust in the machine, like if you or be like, no, we don't do it like that. We do it like this now. I've even heard talk about how you coach patterns, for different levels. Like, oh, we don't start so technical with the lifter. We start simple, so we don't use these cues or anything else. Like, it's always a delicate way to go about it. We're like, I would be really hesitant to teach anything one way and then change how I teach it another way as that athlete progresses. Does that make, what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so, you have to convey it to the level of the lifter,
the right audience. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like if I were training, a 12-year-old, I wouldn't talk to them the same way I talk to, a 30-year-old CrossFit who's been doing this for a while,
Yeah.
So, but the technical model that I have in my head is the same.
Yeah. Exactly. That's the thing. It doesn't, as CrossFit puts it, it doesn't differ by kind, it differs by degree. And you make those adjustments, but you're still speaking to the same points of performance, et cetera. How long did the book take? Like once you decided you were going to pull that string, how long were you into it for?
So, it took a while because, I just, I would read one book and I thought, that was going to be enough. But then in order to, add some of the fat that I talked about earlier, I needed more evidence to set that up. So then I started researching articles on some of those topics. And then, so then I was like, okay, not only do I need to use this book, but then I need to use this article. And like I said, it takes you down a rabbit hole. And then there might be some stuff that you discover where you're like, oh, wow, what about this topic? Let me add that as well. So it took over 2 years to get it done. And I ended up using about 200 articles and about 4 books.
Yeah.
Now, after a while, you start getting a lot of coherence. You start seeing the same thing over and over again. But, there's just those little nuggets that they emphasize in, in one random article that can change the entire chapter.
Yeah, right.
That's like I said, you might have a coach that says something offhand, which to them is kind of like second nature. But then once you say, hey, can you expand on that for a second? And it just completely, it it can completely change the way you see something.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that going on as well. And so, yeah, it was, but it was a fun process, you know. I mean, I learned a lot as well. And then, you know, once I had it written in English, then I went through a lot of editing to then clean it up and make it palatable. Because again, I have a research background, so it's fine for me to write it, you know, in a very dry technical manner, but I wanted them to be accessible and legible.
Yeah.
You know, and fun, you know, like, because I like reading about this stuff, even if it is something technical and terse, but I know not everyone is like that. So so I wanted to make sure that it was an easy read.
Yeah. I and I think you've done a fantastic job of that. Like, it is definitely a user-friendly book to pick up. I think between the white book and the visual manual, that both are just like super easy to access for any level, especially as a weightlifter looking to learn. You're like, man, it's so great to just be able to pull something open and just be like, you can be learning immediately. That right away you can be pulling high quality content out of here and giving yourself something to think about and take to the gym like right away. When was the first course then? So the book came out, did you say 2013? Was the no, sorry, you started in 2013.
Yeah, the book came out, I'd have to check. I think it came out in 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
I have to go back and look at it.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and I go back and edit it a little bit, you know, just to clean it up and whatnot. But it's kind of stood the test of time.
Yeah.
So, and I remember even Louis read it, you know, and he dug it.
Oh
so,
man,
for me, that was like near and dear. Like, I was like, okay, that you know, because like, you know, I grew up reading his stuff,
of course,
learning his stuff.
Yeah,
and then for him to then turn around and read what I wrote, you know, I was just like, whoa.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's kind of that's a weird. It's a weird feeling.
Yeah. Oh man, like so I remember I got it early on. When it was released, and I remember getting into it and just be like, man, I can't tell enough people about this. Like my friends in Ohio for sure, and conjugate athletes for sure. Like, man, this is 100% worth a read. It sounds so familiar. It's just such a great job of this content put together. Yeah.
When I saw that he had it, when he got it, I was like, I was sweating, you know. I was like, oh man, I hope he likes it.
That's so cool. And then, so first course, when did that start?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, like a lot of coaches, you know, first I started experimenting on myself, you know, before I started doing this, and so, but once I felt confident enough to do this, I started getting out there. It's kind of around, let's say about 2014, when, because that's when things started to blow up in CrossFit.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't go into this like thinking I was going to ever do seminars or anything like that, but just that time in CrossFit, it just exploded.
Yep.
And there was a huge demand just for weightlifting instruction. Like if CrossFit never happened, I would have just been doing this. I still would have been doing this. I would have just been doing it for myself, you know, like,
yeah,
like I was in the strength game way before CrossFit.
Yeah.
And so I love lifting heavy. I love technical mastery, you know, and I was training people in that, and that was fine. But when that boom occurred, you know, there was just that opportunity where people were looking for weightlifting instruction.
Yeah.
You know, not like
100%.
Not like weightlifting for track and field or weightlifting, you know, for baseball or football or whatever. Because, you know, I was mainly using weightlifting for clients in other sports at the time, you know?
Yep.
And,
absolutely.
you know, so I would have my high school kids, you know, that want to play football, and they need to learn how to power clean, or they need to get a heavy squat and whatnot. So, but when CrossFit came out, that was the first time where there was a huge demand for just weightlifting instruction. And so I figured that, this was different than, what was already out there, and just everybody got in on it. I mean, there's Russian weightlifting seminars. There's
Klokov's out there, like
yeah. So so like there's everybody got in on it. So I would just say it was luck, just because of that boom, and then it took off from there. And then now I've done over 100 seminars, and
all over the world.
Yeah, like in over 25 countries or so, and so I've found my groove.
Yeah,
but I still I still tweak around the edges of it.
Of course,
yep. Based on what I'm reading, what I'm learning, what I'm implementing, and stuff. So so the core is there, but there might be a new cue that I implement, or just another way of explaining it. Because, whenever I had kids from other sports, I would have to try to convey this in a way that they understood. So, if I'm, I didn't always use weightlifting terminology, I would use something that they would use either in track or in field, like a movement that they already knew how to do. Mm-hmm. And then I would say, okay, when you change direction for this lift, it's going to be like this when you do your sport, and then the light bulb goes off, and then they're able to pull under the bar or whatever,
Yep.
So, so I'm always trying to teach to the individual, and, so like I have the way I approach it and whatnot, but I definitely try to put it in ways that the individual will understand. And sometimes I'll go to a seminar where I'll say something, and then somebody will say, "Oh, so you mean it's like this?" And then I'll think about it for a second. I'm like, exactly, just like that. And I'm going to use that from now on as well. Like I'm going to add that in there to kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So,
and do you have a fair number of athletes?
Languages and cueing and things like that.
Yeah. Do you have a fair number of athletes that you are still working one-on-one with? Like, so you got seminars on weekends and traveling for that, but do you work one-on-one still with a ton of athletes?
I don't do, so one-on-ones, I don't do very much. That would have to be a really special case.
Sure.
But like everybody, once the pandemic hit, everybody got online and started doing more online training. So I do have some in-app training that I manage there. And and I just started that this year, like this January.
Oh, sweet.
So that's been fun.
Yeah.
And then, and now that the world is opening up, I'm managing that with the travel. Totally.
But, getting back to it.
I didn't do it for the longest time just because I was traveling, more, 20 plus weekends a year.
Yeah.
Teaching seminars. So, and then in the middle of that, I was writing the second book, and just trying to put out content.
Yeah. The Instagram content must take a ton of time. Like it is so valuable and so well done.
Thank you. So, I've tried to, so I stay on top of that. I don't follow the, like the social media guidelines, where they want you to post like every day or twice a day or something. Yeah. I just can't,
it's a big ask.
Yeah. So, I post I try once a week, and I try to go for the quality rather than the quantity.
Yeah. No, the content is super strong. Like if anyone's listening who's not currently following Moss Strength, like it is 100% worth the click on Instagram for sure. Are you guys also Facebook and the other? I'm not on those things.
So I have a Facebook page as well, and so it's just been Facebook and Instagram. You know, I tried YouTube a little bit, but it's just that these platforms have kind of developed into their own ecosystems that it's like it's hard to do all of them.
It's a massive effort and undertaking, especially if that's not the only thing that you do.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think if I weren't traveling, if I weren't trying to write books or blog or anything like that, then maybe. But I've had to learn to, pick my battles in how I want to put this out there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so last year, I got into blogging as well, which that's something that I've wanted to do. I
Yep.
just, cause I do like writing. I think, that is, one of my strengths,
Yep.
and in terms of,
That seems true.
content. Yeah. So, I've tended to err more on the writing side rather than say like, the video side on YouTube or something like that. So, but so writing is where it's at, because it just gives me time to edit what I want to say, and make it more exact. There's no ums or ahs or anything like that. So you can
Yeah, I could see that. Yep.
yeah, so you can be very precise, and then you just have more time to make your case.
Yep.
And so and I like combining it with visual media. So either a video clip of somebody lifting, or a media or some sort of image that I create, or a photo, whatever. It's just it allows for a combination of talents that I like and can put together in a product.
And can people find that on the website?
Yeah, it's at ChineseWeightlifting.com/blog.
Yep.
So
Sweet.
I've been writing I've been using some of the scientific articles that either didn't make it into the book, or that I just couldn't, for space reasons, just couldn't get into them too deeply, without taking a chapter into a massive tangent. So, so the blog lets me kind of flesh those out, because, I went through, I used 200 articles for the book, but, I have in my library, I have double that. Right. And they just, some of them were either redundant, or they just, like I said, they were just tangents that I just couldn't go and either make a new chapter, or I just had space restrictions. So
in the course, given you must see quite a few CrossFitters, do you find that there's common themes for athletes coming into the seminar? They're like, oh, it's very common to see athletes missing this component with their Olympic training.
Well, I mean, I see a lot of techniques, and part of that is just because of, like I mentioned earlier, if a lot of coaches have their own way of doing things. And so, I've seen a lot of different styles of lifting. And now with CrossFit, there's a little bit more standardization to that. But so if somebody's been CrossFitting for a while and they have what CrossFit technique, put it that way. I see a lot of that. But for the ones who like CrossFit, but they're like weightlifting curious, they're leaning to the weightlifting side, or they've transitioned out of CrossFit and now they're trying to learn weightlifting, so that's where I'll see a lot more a variety in technique. And also just different countries, I mean, I talk about the US because I live here and I have that experience, but it's the same situation in other countries. They have their own federations and their own way of how things have been either described or taught. Yeah. And it's been and for people who are looking for something different, this seminar is an opportunity for that.
Do you get a common piece of feedback from people? They were like, oh, this idea or concept really resonated with me.
Yeah. So, I mean, the common feedback is I learned a lot. So,
yeah.
So when I do a seminar, it's not it's not a seminar where you max out, because you're just not going to have the motor control to do a heavy weight that day with something new, I mean, just, and that's not a weightlifting thing. That's just an anything thing, like if it's your first day of learning something, you're not going to be a professional at it on the first day, no matter how much you understand it, how much you think you got it, it's just, you just need that practice.
Yeah.
So, so given that, I focus more on, teaching, you know. So if you're into, uh, if you want technical mastery, or if you want a way to understand this so that you can explain it in your way to your people, like that's a seminar for you. And, you know, people will learn how to do a lot of assistance movements, progressing into the snatch and the clean and jerk. And then I go into why this matters. So, you know, not just when I was writing the book, but also in the seminars, you know, I wanted to make it clear that there is a reason for this, you know. So it's not just opinion. Because that's what I had in the beginning, was opinion. And so, you know, we've all had the coach that's, you know, when you say, hey, why do we do this? And they say, because I said so, or because this is the way, or whatever. And my frustration with that early on was that, you know, there has to be something more to this. And so, when I went to China, and I learned that no, they do this because there's a reason. And so once I understood the reasons, then it was a little bit easier for them to say, you know, to just take what they said and run with it. You know, so if the coach says, because I said so, yes, I understand. You know, so you know, I want to make sure that when people come to these, that, you know, they're doing something different, but they understand why they're doing it, that there is a reason for it. And if they don't have a reason, and if they have a question about it, you know, I'm always ready to defend it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Man, I took it, I guess, 2 years ago. We've got it, or just the fall before COVID. So I guess 2019, 3 years ago. And then we've got you coming back this September. I felt like the biggest thing I took away was just the clarity and simplicity. That for the complicated nature of these movements, that instead of discussing them like, oh, they're very hard, they're very technical, it takes a long time to learn them, it just felt, here's how you do them. Here are the things that are actually important. These are the things we're going to focus on. Everything else could sort of slide away. And I felt like I took quite a lot away from two days of learning. And having done many seminars for weightlifting now, that this resonated the most for me, because the style and the nature of the training felt very similar to our system and what we believe to be the right path already. Even inside of, I think, CrossFit world of, you know, CrossFit being that constantly varied functional movement at high intensity, that this felt like, again, it was constantly varied, the functional movements as they apply to being successful, these lifts. So improving the primary, you know, clean and jerk and snatch, using these movements as, you know, feeders for that. And then building off of accessory work to fortify weaknesses and exploit strengths. You're like, I loved it. And I'm very excited that we've got you coming back. The knowledge you've got is massive. And I think that it's a combination of your humble nature, your background with sort of the PhD, and having that sort of, I think you've got a really analytical approach to looking at these things, and a willingness to take the time required to get the job done very well. I would encourage anyone to track down anything you guys have put out there. Beyond, so we've got Maw Strength on Instagram, same handle on Facebook.
Yeah.
And then the website again?
It's ChineseWeightlifting.com.
And that's where they can find out sort of where all the seminars are, find the blog, anything else that you want to put out there?
No, I mean, I look forward to visiting the Squamish area again. You know, it was a really pretty area and very nice weather the last time I was there. And so
yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
It can really vary.
Well, you know, the first day I was there was like a big fog. And then outside of, you know, like in Vancouver, it was fine. But then once you started heading up to the mountains, there was a fog. But then the next day it was like crystal clear. It was beautiful. So
yeah, that's about right. Any day to day can really vary quite a bit. I'll cut us off here.